Welcome to Talking Digital Academy, the audio format for the Digital Academy conference organized by the Digital History Department at Bielefeld University. The Digital Academy is an annual online workshop that explores a variety of topics from the field of digital humanities. This year's topic was language models in digital humanities research, and the Digital Academy was dedicated on exploring the use of such models in DH research, but also on their use and potential in general. We wanted to explore the potential that emerges with the usage of language models and at the same time discuss how to deal with challenges and critically assess how computational methods and interdisciplinary settings may affect traditional work processes in the humanities. For an even deeper dive into language models, we held a special expert panel on an open space day. This day's expert interviews form the basis for the 3 podcast episodes on this channel. Our host for this podcast is Silke Schwand, who is a professor of digital history at Bielefeld University. Her second guest at today's Open Space Day is Mareike Schumacher from the University of Regensburg.
I'm really glad to have Mareike Schumacher as our next expert in this Open Space Day session. Mareike is professor of digital humanities at the University of Regensburg, but currently professor at the University of Stuttgart. We've just been discussing that you are I think it's a substitute professor, I don't know, there for 2 semesters now. She was also, before becoming a professor for digital humanities, the coordinator of the Vortex project. I think this is one of the projects that everybody knows who's part of the at least German-speaking digital humanities community. It's a platform where you collected lots of tools, lots of discussions also on the theory and methods of digital humanities, a very, very well known and also very resourceful website. She's interested in the theory of the digital humanities and the development of tools and methods, which is also, but not only, represented with or connected with your work for Vortext. Also, the research revolves around literary, or particularly literary and cultural studies paired with computational literary studies. So we have like a different discipline from Tobias Rode, who was like a trained historian. Now we have a literary scholar, and both meeting in the field of digital humanities and dealing with language models. And one of your current projects engage with representations of gender in literary text, as well as building a diversity corpus containing texts that feature non-binary gender representations. And I think this is like one of the most important projects going on right now in the German-speaking digital humanities community. So to kick off our conversation, I will just start with a very general question. As you know, and that's why we invited you, we are speaking about the use, advantages, disadvantages, chances and challenges of language models and engaging with language models in the digital humanities. So my first question is, how are you using language models in your own research? What are the different contexts maybe in which you have already applied such models, and which roles do they play in your research processes?
Yes, thank you for the kind introduction and for the question also. So I'm using language models in lots of ways. I'm also using all kinds of language models. At the current situation, everybody is talking about large language models, but I'm actually also working quite often with small language models. And especially these small language models, I use them for categorization. You just talked about the gender project. So that is one case of categorization in which I use small language models and also middle-sized language models. I use them as a basis for classification. So if once you have such a small or middle-sized or large language model, you can classify automatically. So that's what I do. I use large language models to enhance the small language models. So if I have a specific small, maybe a gender language model, I can enhance this with a more general large language model. So that is one use. I use the large language model to see common patterns in cultural representations. I also, very different field, but I also use large language models to help me coding. Very nice and fancy feature. I use the large language models to train other smaller language models. So this is, I think, all kinds of usages for me in my research of language models.
Okay, great, thank you. We already spoke about the the models can help me with coding, they can help me with training other models during the course of our research. But if you had to maybe be or give a prophecy, what do you think are the new topics or new research questions arising in the future from the use of language models? Do you think it's more like a methodological challenge, or are there really also topics within the humanities that we would never have been able to do and which are now kind of opening up for with the use of language models?
I think it's a little bit of both. So on the one hand, in the digital humanities, there is this large new topic of developing methods, or also if you have a method, but it's actually working best at linguistic topics, then you have to adapt it to other topics. So this kind of domain adaptation is something very digital humanities specific, but this is nothing new. This is just digital humanities, but it's just different from humanities research before. So what do we have now with the large language models with kind of new research topics? I think the very largest new topic is just the large language model as itself. So using it as a research object, looking on how it's working, what it is representing. Also, if you ask it to write a story or something, then you see how it is writing a story, how it is working, what kind of motifs it is using. There's this discussion on style adaptation. So write me a story in the style of 19th century fiction, something like that. And then it will write you a story, and then you can analyze what is it taking up? What kind of stylistics are in there? Are these the stylistic elements that we find in non-digital humanities research or in digital humanities research? Or what kind of new facets of these topics do we have there? And then, of course, we can just enlarge our perspective. We can use more data. We can ask questions of historical change. We can really also take into account what Moretti called the unread, the great unread. So we do not only have to focus on literature we can read ourselves, but we can now actually open up and just give these language models more literature. So we can have a broader perspective on literature. For me, it's the most interesting part of these new perspectives in digital humanities.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd like to pick up on two of the points that you just mentioned. The first being when you said that it's a really interesting trajectory that we have now language models as research objects. I was wondering whether this is kind of also the same if we say it's not only the language model, but also maybe language itself and the way that we use language. And can we use language models to maybe also better understand and model the way that we think stories work? And I just had this quotation of Roberto Busa in my mind when he spoke about the first attempts in automatic translation during the 40s and 50s. And he said, so it's not about how we taught the models, but what the models can teach us about our own mistakes and understanding how language works. So I was wondering whether this is like a new version or maybe a new level of also these kinds of perspectives.
Yes, I think so. I think that is one of the most interesting facets of it. As I talked in the very beginning about classification and working on categorization with also small language models, this is what I find most interesting. If you work with such a small language model and you ask it to classify nouns according to gender, and then there are errors, there are misclassifications. And if you look at these misclassifications, you will actually find out that there's something in the narrative pattern or in the language pattern that leads to this misclassification. And then sometimes, depending on the topic you work on, you will also see that the definitions you find in your humanities discipline, like mine is narratology. So if you have some narratological categories, and you see, oh, there's a big misclassification. Sometimes it's actually because the definition is not good enough. You have to redefine, you have to rework on these narrative theories. This is a very interesting topic, I think, one of the most interesting from my perspective.
Yeah, it feels like, using the system to kind of tell you where your own mistakes lie, or where where you kind of need to go back and think about a little more. And I think this is one of the interesting, as you said, also the most interesting interactions that are possible with, the things that we think that we know, and then observing ourselves by having this system reproduce what we kind of, put into the models in the first hand.
Yeah.
So the second point was about canon. You were speaking about the big unread. Was it the big unread or the large unread? I don't know. So this
maybe
idea
also
of
great
whatever. Anyway,
something like that.
That one. And I think this is also an interesting idea of, and a problem maybe at the same time, to think about corpora in a different way, maybe. Like when I started working quantitatively with medieval history or historical texts from the Middle Ages, one of my teachers always said, I need to differentiate between corpora and repositories, because corpora are structured and they have like it's a decision or a decisive process, where repositories can be anything. So what do you think? How do large, maybe not even large, but any language model really also maybe influence the way that we talk about data sets as corpora or as repositories? How does this idea of what we should have read versus all the rest maybe also change or is challenged by working with these kinds of models?
Yeah, I think it has been discussed a lot that systems like ChatGPT are actually black boxes. We do not know what kind of training data is in there. And I think this discussion has brought up exactly these thoughts that you were talking about, thinking about corpora, thinking about repositories, thinking about how we can use them. And I see now so small tendencies in digital humanities to come up with criteria for corpus creation, to think about how do we work with our corpora. I also think that we should have something like corpus competency or knowing corpora that we are working with, because somebody has to know what's in there. The discussion on the large language models always comes to the end, we do not know what is in there, and that's bad. And I think that's right, this end of the discussion. And that's what leads us to thinking more about what's in our corpora, coming up with better corpora. You have just mentioned the diversity corpus project I'm working on, which is such a project thinking about how should a corpus be that's not only canonical, but includes all kind of stories on gender, on typical gender, on atypical gender. How must such a corpus be created? And I think that's very important. And I think it's kind of one of the dangers of working with corpora or repositories is just taking everything that there is, just sticking to Moretti, saying, what I need the great unread, and just taking everything of it. I think that's not the way to go. I think we have to look inside, see what is missing, see what is new in there compared to the canon, stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you. We just moved into the question of challenges and limitations already, so maybe we can dwell on this a little bit. So one of the things that we just spoke about with the corpora and the data sets and the problems that you mentioned is maybe one part of the challenges and limitations. Do you have any other challenges and limitations in mind, or would you like to talk about some of them maybe?
Yes, I have one in mind, which is a great limitation, I think. When I first used ChatGPT to learn something about how it deals with gender, I saw that it's very good on creating typical representations and also describing typical representations. And it's really not good at classifying atypical things. it can describe this, saying, I'm not sure about this. This could be this or that according to context. But coming up with new categories or saying, now this is not male or female, but this is queer, something like that, or this is diverse, it's non-binary. And this is something that the system is not good at. It's really good at finding the typical, that what we often use in our stories or in our representation. It's good for that, but it's not good for coming to the atypical, to the non-typical. And I think that is maybe the point where we should then turn to the small language models, because they are better at that. We can train them, we can learn together with them, we can look at their errors, we can open up the system, look inside and see what is in there and work with that. So that is one limitation. And it's hard to describe, but it's ChatGPT, for example, it's so easy to use. So everybody is just using it and making sense of it without really knowing what it's inside. And I think that is also a limitation, because there are, of course, also people from critics or something like that using it as research object and then kind of coming up with elaborations on why it is dangerous or something like that. And as digital humanist, you see or you feel or you get to know that this person is not really into the stuff. It's just on the surface of it, which is also an interesting topic. But I think it's kind of not really bringing together digital humanities and non-digital humanities, but it's kind of not bridging the gap, but enlarging the gap, something like that. So I think that is also kind of maybe not a limitation, but a danger or something I fear.
And how would you suggest to bridge the gap? Like, do you have a plan or a program in place where you try to bring the digital and the non-digital closer together? I know it's a difficult question, but maybe it's also a very practical question, because I think being digital humanists, this is like at the core of what most of the people in the room actually do every day. Be confronted with people who think they are non-digital and telling them, well, you're not that far off, actually. Let me explain why this is the case. Or, so maybe you have some ideas about bridging the apparent gap between the digital and the non-digital.
Yes, I have, unsurprisingly, because as you told, I've worked for Vortex for many years, and it was my main job to actually think about concepts to bridge the gap. And now, of course, I'm responsible for a master's program in digital humanities. So the first thing I do is to try to get the former BA students, humanities BA students, into being digital humanists. So I think what is most important is that we kind of stick to the humanistic interest that we are. It's so easy when you start with the digital humanities to get caught up with methodology, because it's really nice and it's also fun to do it. And then you dive deeper and deeper into it. And then you're actually moving further away from the non-digital humanities. But when you stick to the research questions, to the interest, then it's not that hard to stay in communication with a non-digital humanist. Then there are also constantly colleagues or just somebody you know coming to you and asking you for it. There's a huge interest of non-digital humanities master's students and doctoral students for digital methods. So I think that you just have to stay in conversation and stick to the humanities research questions you're interested in. Of course, you can also do the other stuff. But if you're interested in bridging the gap, then it is good to do this. You can also get caught up with the methodology, and that's fine. And we need that in digital humanities too. I do not want to say that that's not worth it or something. It is. But if you want to bridge the gap, I think the commonality of research interest is where you can dive into the conversation very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a very, very important point. I mean, I don't know about you, but I always find myself like in discussions and talks to tell people I'm still a historian. I'm not alien to whatever you think or you do. You know, we have like this common understanding of what we're actually interested in. And I think this is like one of the most important points. And at the same time, it opens up another I don't want to call it a problem. Another thing that we maybe talk about is competencies, right? So if we want to be as close as possible to still being a historian or a literary scholar, you need, and I think our generation, we most of us come from a humanities discipline and had like more or less traditional training, and then we picked up the digital, and now we're kind of combining it. And excuse me for claiming that we're all the same generation. I'm probably the oldest anyway, but you know, I think that's sort of the career paths are still quite similar. So we picked up the competencies in being able to use the methodologies and maybe also do some developing ourselves. Um, but if we think about the digital humanist and the competencies that, for example, the PhD generation now, that we would suggest that they need to have in order to be part of both worlds, how do you, what is the set of competencies that you think that digital humanists need, and how would you ease their fears of knowing many different things, but maybe not being an expert in any of them?
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
Sorry.
Really a difficult question. But I think, yeah, that first of all, the first step is that you do not have to lose your background in humanities. So when a student is coming from a bachelor's, for me, it's important that they already know who they are. They already know that they are scientists in their field or humanists in their field, that they have methodological competencies, and that it's good to use them. First step. Second step is to show there are tools that are easy to use. So just try them out. Something like annotation tools, for example. Also, Voyant is a nice tool for trying things out. And then we go deeper into it. Then we see, okay, then there's maybe Jupyter notebooks, and you can do nice and handy stuff with Jupyter notebooks. Somebody else created for you, and you just try that out. And on each step on this way, it's important to reflect also. Not just so at the beginning, of course, you just use the tools and try them out. But at some point, you have to think about, what am I doing now? How is this different? Sometimes it's not that different, by the way. So if you use annotation tools, it's nothing different at all, basically. But sometimes it is different. Then we come to network analysis, for example, where you realize, okay, I'm not working with the text any longer. I just extract something from the text, and then I'm working with something else. But what is that? So this theoretic thinking about something, also thinking back to, how is this connecting to my BA discipline? How is this different? How is this opening up new perspective? Just the questions you are asking right now are constant questions in our heads. How is this different from before, and how isn't it? And I think often we come to the point that it's not that different. And then there are some aspects, of course, some research areas where you think, wow, this is really different stuff. Also, like using technical terms and something. So it's also possible when digital humanists talk with each other that non-digital humanists do no longer understand what they're talking about. This is also, of course, possible, and it's also valid, and it's also nice sometimes nerding around. Just it's also important, but yeah. I think these are some of the many facets there are to this question.
Yes, thank you. And sorry again for posing all the big ones. But I think those are the ones that we always, we need to keep on asking ourselves, as you said, in order to, find good ways to deal with them. But maybe going back to what we actually came here to talk about, which is language models. Do you think that there are specific competencies that people need to have when dealing with language models?
Yes, there are, and it's the whole complex of machine learning. And I also witnessed that for students, it's often hard to deal with machine learning. It's easy to deal with annotation. It's also somehow easy to deal with network analysis. Also, it's very different. But when it comes to machine learning, there's some kind of inner fear or something. It's always hard to find students willing to go to machine learning seminars. So sometimes they have to, so then they are there. But if not, then there's maybe one or two persons interested in that, because somehow there's a fear of machine learning. But I think it's so important to get to know more about language models, because if you learn machine learning kind of from scratch, starting with digital annotation, because you also need annotations, and then opening up the system and looking at the different kind of models. You can take the classic machine learning models and then the neural network models and everything. What I find helpful for students is that they do not have to understand every aspect of it. They do not have to, they maybe have to once try to understand the math, but they do not have to learn it by heart. They just have to see it once and then think about it maybe later, and just get the bigger picture of it. And if you have some kind of bigger picture of machine learning and tried it out with your own annotations and your own small classification system, it's much easier to understand the large language models, because they are nothing really hugely different. They're just one step further in the development, or two or 5 steps.
Yeah, I think it is good to hear that I don't have to necessarily know the math. I just have to kind of be able to follow it. Okay, maybe we can, like with the next couple of questions, go back to the specific research that you're doing as a literary scholar. So we talked a little bit about text and data already, and also about the different considerations in choosing data sets as training data, for example, or improving that. Maybe you can, especially maybe also from the diversity corpus project, what about, like, how do I create a good training data set, whatever that is? So what would be your criteria in maybe trying to overcome all these bias problems, for example, which is always a big caveat when dealing with these pre-trained models? What is good training data, and how do I get it? Do you have any take on that?
I think a good training data is data that is created in a really reflective process, and that you have thought through from the beginning. It is not possible to come up with perfect training data, because we do not have it, especially not digitally. So you cannot, there's always some kind of idea of a perfect training corpus, but this is nothing we can get. What we can get is good training data where if you've thought about the variables that you have to keep in mind. So for example, for the gender, for the diversity corpus, for gender representations, it is important, of course, to have authors from different genders. When you deal with historical data, it is not possible to get a lot of training data from non-binary authors, because we do not know anything about non-binary authors from the 18th century or 19th century or something like that, because non-binary wasn't a category then to think about, or wasn't there. So what we can do is balance the corpus according to male, female. So this would be one concrete step. So you can take just, I don't know, 250 texts from female authors and 250 texts from male authors. We can use this strategy of balancing also in terms of years. So you can have 1 text per year or 5 texts per year, or so you have these kind of balancing strategies. This would be, creating a good training data according to metadata, so something that is outside of the text. But then there are also criteria inside the text. For gender representations, of course, it's important that you have to know what kind of gender representations you want to look at, and then that they are in the corpus. So if you know you want to look at male and female gender representations, it's very easy. You can just take any text by female or male author, there will be male and female representations. But then you want to have kind of atypical gender representation. So what is that? In the 18th and 19th century, maybe something like the hermaphrodite, what we do not say anymore today, but that was a term then, would be something to include. Eunuchs would be something to include. Then some kind of cross-dressing stories could be important, because it could be cross-dressing just for practical reasons, or it could be cross-dressing really because the person wants to be somebody else. Then what do we also have? So I do not have to name everything, but I think you get the picture. It's just kind of trying to balance the corpus according to the research phenomenon you're interested in. So you have these representations in your corpus. And then if you want to do machine learning, it's also important that you do not have only one representation of each, but you have to have a number of them, 100 or 150 or whatever. It depends on the topic. Yeah, and then we are very close to having a good corpus. So then we are ready to come up with annotations. So that would be the next step. And also annotations should be qualitatively measured somehow. But we have criteria for that. We can do several annotations. We can compare them. We can come up with inter-annotator agreement. We can come up with a gold standard. And then we know that this is kind of good training data. And yeah, I know, I think that we, digital humanists, are the ones to come up with these criteria, to think about that. Also to tell others when somebody asks us, can I take this corpus? Is it good training data? We can look at the documentation, and that's also important. If you come up with a corpus, you have to document it so that others can reuse it in a good way, so that you have a documentation which is really clear to others, not only to yourself. And then we can have a look at this documentation and say, yes, this is good, a good corpus or good training data, and this can be used in digital humanities processes.
Sounds like a lot of work to create good training data, but then we knew that beforehand or also already.
It is actually one of the funniest steps in the history of students coming from non-digital humanities to digital humanities, that at some points they kind of come to you and look at you with big eyes and say, this is not easier or this is not faster in any way than the things I have done before. Sometimes, on the contrary, it's taking up more time. You have to think about new things, other things, more things. And this is always some point in the development from non-digital humanist to digital humanist, which I think everybody has at this point in life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also, having to tackle problems that you wouldn't have had to begin with if you hadn't gone down that particular road. Actually thinking about this. But I mean, this is similar to the point that we had in the beginning of the interview, to say that, being forced to formalize a humanities question actually helps you to also get a different perspective on your research interests. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely. And also at some point you might think about your research and see, well, these are different phenomena I'm interested in now. Especially high-frequency phenomena compared to non-frequency or non-frequent phenomena. So in non-digital humanities, you are always, or not always, but many people are interested in rare phenomena, the exceptional. In digital humanities, it's the frequent. So it's not possible anymore to work with non-digital methods, something like that.
And maybe to like my last question before we open up the discussion to all the questions that I'm sure that the people in the Zoom room also have. I wanted to talk, or to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about mixed methods. So we have been talking about, doing training data properly and also using the digital methods. But maybe you can say something about what do you mean by mixed methods when you talk about this? And also how does that, like what kind of, I don't know, workflow would you build for like a typical or your research question that involves mixed methods?
Mhm. I think actually mixed methods is so intrinsically digital humanities. I think I don't know if there are digital humanities projects that use only one single method. I don't think so. So I know that usually mixed methods is meant as using quantitative as well as qualitative methods, but I'm not really a fan of this quantitative bias qualitative. So I think mixed methods starts when you use different methods, have something like a tool pipeline. So this would be for me also a mixed method. But also in the more general way of understanding mixed methods, so using non-digital and digital methods together. I think this is also something digital humanists do every time, because we have to, at the beginning of our research process, we have to do research on our phenomena. We have to do theoretic work. We have to look into the non-digital humanities as well as the digital humanities. What have other people done? And then, as I said, there is the annotation process, which is mostly really close reading process. Sometimes we're reading our text 5 times and annotating them 5 times or more. So this is really a really close reading process, and you really know something about these texts you have. So if you're working with machine learning, like I do most of the time, then you start with close reading. You know already something about these texts you're working with. You have read some of them very, very closely. So sometimes when I read other studies or analysis, it seems like first there's the digital process, and then I complement it with close reading. I dive into the literature. But I think it's more entangled with each other. So for my part, I start with close reading. Then I go kind of further away using several methods from it, but I always return to the close reading process. It's this iterative process, always returning to. So for example, if I do, I start with machine learning, then I do an automated annotation, and then I do something with the annotations, for example, network analysis. I have to dive back into the data to see what are now my parameters, what are my nodes, what are my edges. So again, I have to think about that. And I think this is kind of the characteristic of the whole research project, that you always go back and forth, and there's no such thing like a pure quantitative approach or a pure distant reading approach. Not for me, at least, so maybe for other people. But I have to admit that when I was starting, coming to the digital humanities, I also thought that it would be possible that you just kind of throw your data into some box and there will be some magic. And then you will have to have something neat and handy and you can analyze that. But I realized that this is not the case. At least it's not for me. It's not what I like to do most.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you for that vision. I think this was also something that everybody present has like a memory of, the expectations that we had when we started, or that we are still confronted with. Thank you so much for being so open and frank about your experiences, and also giving us some really big questions to think about, or continue to think about. It was a pleasure having you. So thank you again, Mareike. It was a pleasure.